Hello and welcome to 10 Minutes on Faith and Disarmament, a podcast from the Joint Public Issues team. My name is Florence. I am one of the new JPIT interns, and joining me today is Zahraa Kapasi from Scrap Weapons, a project advocating for disarmament. Zahraa, thank you so much for joining me today. Yeah, I'd love for you to elaborate on that and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much for having me. As you mentioned, my name is Zahraa. I am a consultant for Scrap Weapons, which stands for the very long title of the strategic concept for the removal of arms and proliferation. So we are a project housed at SOAS, University of London, and we advocate for general and complete disarmament, which means the removal of all weapons of mass destruction and then restrictions on all other arms. Within that, I have been primarily focusing on advocating for a special session on disarmament to be convened at the United Nations.
Okay, great. I'm going to be asking you more about that in a minute. But first, I'd love to hear more about your work in movement building and youth engagement.
So youth engagement has been a very big part of my job. Scrap has been a very student and youth heavy organisation. We are based at a university. We take on a cohort of students every year that volunteer with us as project assistants. And my favourite part of my job is working with the students. That's a very big part of what I do. And with them, we spend a lot of our energy in reaching out to other organizations, developing coalitions around disarmament and trying to extend the conversation beyond the typical environments in which it takes place. So, for example, religion and disarmament has been a very big interest of mine within my work. And so there have been many conversation and many avenues in which we've pursued bringing in various faith groups into the conversation, like reaching out to the Methodist Church. We've had a few meetings and events happening with the Methodist Church, and currently we have some ongoing relations with an imam in New York who we will hopefully be hosting an event with at the Covenant Church in New York for the Summit of the Future. So we are very, very in favour of interfaith dialogue and disarmament and developing connections through faith-based groups because of the influence and the importance that they hold with individuals and society as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like you've got a lot on.
A lot.
If there are any students or young people who want to get involved, how can they?
They are always welcome to reach out to us. Our website is just www.scrapweapons.com. Please do email. I'll be the one that sees it. So I'd love to hear from you to get involved with our work. You don't even have to be a current student. If you're interested in disarmament, if you would like to volunteer, please do reach out and we would be more than happy to work with you on that. If you don't want to join an organisation, you're also welcome to educate yourself, share things on social media, reach out to your elected officials in whichever capacity you are comfortable. You can get involved with the disarmament conversation.
Okay, that's so great. Thanks. You mentioned earlier just briefly about the influence of faith groups. I wondered if you could explain a little bit more about the impact faith groups have had on your work.
So this is not to undermine the power and the influence the UN holds, just a disclaimer for everyone listening. But I do feel that the current conversation and debate is very siloed. It's very clinical. It takes place with officials and governments and civil society as an actor rather than individuals. Whereas bringing faith into it, it brings up more of a moral, humanitarian, ethical argument, which is very important. We speak about peace and security in very political terms, but it is purely about humans and their safety and the ideas of peace and living together in harmony. That's a very big part of what I believe disarmament should be centered around. And faith brings that in quite a lot. Peace is the foundation of most religions, all religions actually. And that's what feeds through in every conversation that I've had with a faith-based, quite tongue twister there, faith-based leaders and organizations. So I do believe it's so important, and religion has historically had a place to play in international relations and politics. The Vatican holds a seat as an observer state at the United Nations. The first ever General Assembly was held at the Methodist Church in Westminster. Faith continuously plays a part, although it's not overtly stated. To say that faith is not an important actor in these situations would be undermining its influence by quite a lot.
I love that way you described how faith brings that human aspect to things that have become maybe slightly clinical or technological, but actually, yeah, all of these issues with arms, they were made by people who made those decisions around rules.
Exactly. And it's when you see it, when you look at the conversations about pushing forward treaties and things, it's very technical. It's very like, this missile does this, or this is the cost of it, or in whatever capacity. And the human aspect is often quite lost because you are trying to push it through organizations and you are trying to appeal to states or, you know, actors that might benefit from these weapons in whichever capacity. So sometimes I understand that people think that bringing the human aspect can insinuate a sense of, I don't want to say naivety, but that's often how it is labeled. But the whole point of disarmament is for individuals and society to feel safe. So why not speak about the human aspect of it all?
Yeah, it's good. Just moving on then, some people who will be feeling quite pessimistic about all of this will say, oh, but what's the point? Because countries like Russia or China are never going to agree to arms controls. So yeah, do you think arms control is realistic today?
Arms control is a realistic goal. It has to remain a realistic goal. It's a very integral need that we have in the world. It's very tense geopolitically. There's a lot of conflicts ongoing. There's a lot of tension between states. There's not a lot of political will and cooperation between countries to advance these things forward. However, looking back at the Cold War, that was a time where it was probably one of the deepest ideological divisions that we have witnessed. It was the closest we got to the threat of nuclear annihilation. And yet, even at that time, they were able to establish a disarmament framework and they were able to enforce monumental treaties and agreements on disarmament. So if it was possible then, why is it not possible now? I think things are a bit different now in the global context of all, like the world has gotten a lot smaller, but that doesn't mean that the possibilities have reduced.
That's definitely got me feeling a lot more hopeful.
Oh, I'm glad. I know it seems a bit doom and gloom, but
yeah.
there's possibilities out there.
Yeah. So earlier when you introduced yourself, you mentioned the special session on disarmament. Would you mind just explaining briefly what that is and why is it needed?
Yes, absolutely. So a special session on disarmament is a mechanism of the United Nations General Assembly, and it would see the heads of states and governments coming together to discuss and advance the disarmament agenda. What's important about a special session on disarmament is that it sits at the General Assembly, which means that it has more complete representation and it removes the disarmament discussion outside of the current rut that it's in. And by the rut, I mean the Conference on Disarmament. So the Conference on Disarmament is a body that sits for 22 weeks in the year in Geneva at the United Nations. But the last time that they had a treaty come out of the Conference on Disarmament was in 1996.
My goodness.
That's almost 3 decades ago.
Yeah.
3 decades of not really any results, which is a bit disheartening. More than just a bit disheartening. But the reason why we call for a special session on disarmament is to remove it away from the Conference on Disarmament, to breathe some new life into it, for it to be an ideal forum, to revitalize the debate. A big part of what I mentioned was representation. So the Conference on Disarmament, I think, I feel like somebody will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it only sits 63 states, which is a small amount compared to how many there should be. It is bound by the vote of consensus. So it does not take much for somebody to disagree for it to not pass through. Whereas the General Assembly would widen the debate a lot more. It would allow for all disarmament initiatives to be put on the table, to widen the umbrella. Civil society could have more of an input there compared to the Conference on Disarmament. All the member states would be sitting at the General Assembly. So it's very much so needed to bring a new breath of fresh air into the disarmament debate and hopefully see something happen. More concretely happen.
Yeah. Wow. 1996, did you say?
1996.
That is shocking.
On disarmament. That's not to say there haven't been other disarmament initiatives. So there has been the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which is a monumental treaty that is gaining more and more signatures every day. But the Conference on Disarmament, which is a dedicated body to disarmament, is not effective, and therefore we are seeking for there to be a new forum for disarmament itself to be discussed.
Well, that's great. I hope and wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much. We're going to need all the luck we can get.
Finally, what can we do as civil society, as churchgoers, as students?
So as individuals, we can advance disarmament by educating ourselves, sharing what we learn through social media, much as we have seen with various initiatives and spreading awareness about conflicts going on in the world. Disarmament, the same way, can use social media to illustrate the extent to which arms are absolutely horrific and annihilating life at the moment. And I think that isn't spoken about enough within a disarmament context. And so social media is an excellent platform, spreading knowledge, getting involved in discussions, be it with individuals, be it within your communities, be it within your churches. Then through your churches, I think we were having a conversation with Steve previously about the churches getting more involved with their elected officials. Similarly, as individuals, you can always reach out to your elected individuals, write letters, sign petitions, meet them to discuss what you are looking for and what you're hoping for the government and your constituency to take on as an initiative. You can even join organizations like Scrap Weapons, always putting a plug in there. We would love for more people to get involved and join the conversation. So peace and security, peace more so, will not be able to get to the place that we want it without our own input and our own involvement.
Yeah, that's powerful. Definitely research more of Zahraa's work in Scrap Weapons. I know they're at Scrap Weapons on Instagram, or find their website. That's exciting, I guess, about all the different ways to get involved. And Zahraa mentioned that JPIT is doing some work around church engagement with MPs. That's our Constituency Action Network. We'd love you to get involved if you are keen for your church to have a meaningful relationship with your MP. That's it for this episode of the 10 Minutes On podcast focused on the future of arms. If you'd like to find out more about advances in warfare, head to jpit.uk/FOA for briefings, blogs, videos, ways to take action, and more podcast episodes. That's jpit.uk/FOA. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do share it around. Thanks for listening.